You are now tuned in to the Rate Limited podcast. Welcome our hosts, Adam, aka GosuCoder, who's doing lots of extensive experience on evals here, and just his general testing, and he has his own YouTube channel. We also have the founder of Repo Prompt, Eric Provencher. He's here, who has a lot of experience testing these agents in and out, and myself, Ray Fernando, AI live streamer. And today we're going to talk about a lot of juicy topics. The cost of free agents. That's a really big deal from the latest announcement from AMP, as well as Haiku 4.5. It just dropped. Is it good enough to replace some of your day-to-day tasks? Sonnet 4.5, is that still the best? We have lots of questions, and so do you. And we invite you to join us on the Rate Limited podcast. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the show.
Thanks so much for that intro, Ray. So I think just to get us started off, we want to just jump into this new announcement. We have free AI agents now. And that's is quite all the rage. It was blowing up on X yesterday. And I think it's worth diving into, like, what is a free agent? Like, what is it actually costing you? Like, if it's free, is it just the ads? Or is there more to it? So, like, one big announcement they were sharing that they're not kind of stressing too much is that actually costs you your data. So when you're using a free AI agent, you're paying for it in your data usage. So all the code that goes through it is being retained, trained on. And I'm curious, like, what are you all thinking about? Is that like fine for you? Like, if you're working with models, like, are you okay with AI companies taking your data and training on it?
I mean, I could start off there first, if that's all right. And then, first to back up a little bit, I knew subsidized tokens was going to be a thing. I'm actually really surprised AMP is the first one to have done it. I actually expected like an OpenAI or somebody with bigger distribution was going to be the first one to do it. And it's the data brokerage thing is so interesting to me because right now, what we don't understand is how valuable this data is. Because I have to imagine with all the code that's out there, like that's open source, that probably Cursor and Windsurf and all of these have started to gather. I'm really curious what they can actually sell this for. Like, even if I am okay with my data going, like, how valuable is that? And is that actually a model that's going to be sustainable for long term? But to answer your question directly, I think it highly depends. So to me, I think about this as like, if you're a student or you're building a company and you literally need to min-max your spend, you should 100% just be okay with giving your data and like as a student, like what do you have to lose to go and do that? I think it's a great thing for them to be able to do that. What I'm more worried about is the long-term sustainability of this model because tokens are freaking expensive. And I know what ad spend and stuff actually is, and it's going to be interesting. And I'm skeptical that the value of the data is going to stay high for a very long amount of time because there's going to be so much of it out there. I don't know. Maybe Ray or Eric, you guys have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'd love to just pop in, because I feel like
please do, Ray.
I'm already paying for some of these services, and they actually already collect a lot of data, maybe a lot more data than we really realize, and there isn't necessarily a standard in the industry for this. I know when I worked at this fruit company in the Valley, they're extremely strict, and like we're super scared about every single little piece of thing that would get sent anywhere, right? There's just massive amounts of detail there. And in this industry, I've noticed that it's just super loosey-goosey. And so there's varieties of things. And it does make me question, like, okay, what is actually free? And then what are services that I'm paying several $100s a month? And they're still collecting the same or more data sometimes, right? And I think that's what's interesting. And then like the other parts I think about are like, just to kind of throw it out there, it's like data retention policies. Like no one really talks about that. When I actually interview people that I want to sponsor, that's some of the questions I ask. Is the data replicated to other data centers around the world? What most people don't realize is when data gets replicated to another data center, they're bound to that laws of that specific country, which could be nothing. And so you can have other authorities act on that type of data. So these are questions that I feel like no one's really asking or talking about publicly. And it's not that we need to deep dive into those today, but just to get you thinking about this industry and where it's going. And as far as like what these guys are doing, it's kind of genius from a business perspective because you're like a lesser known of the bigger ones. And then you need this variety of data, as we all know from machine learning. It's like the more variety of data, the different languages, the different inputs, the richer that you're going to get for training any models. And I'm just curious from your guys' perspective, because you guys are really into the tooling part, like what do you feel like is the biggest 80/20 of this data capture that you can do? Like if you had 48 hours to capture as much of the world's data as possible, what would you capture, and like what would you kind of focus on tuning in? You know, because you guys have seen a lot of this type of really in the weeds type of things.
So I think I want to jump into a little bit of this. Like, I think one of the things that is the most valuable about putting it in a coding agent and trying to monetize the data, or like trying to like leverage the data for improving your models, is that you need it to be real time, right? Like if you're tweaking the model constantly in the back end and you want to see how that affects usage, you might even A/B test users and try and capture the data back right away, and you know which users are using which version of the model, and you're able to kind of improve your model kind of more dynamically that way. If you're just trying to blanket capture data, there's less of that signal directly tied to the usage that I think makes a difference there. So I think in a coding agent there is that value there, and I think like we didn't really talk about it here, but like it is like XAI for AMP's free model that is providing the usage, and I want to also mention as well, like XAI is providing free usage of this model for that data sharing as well in other tools like Klein and OpenCode. So that is worth noting that the AMP is not the only one providing this model for free, but they are the only one showing you ads to use the tool, which is interesting. So like just on the ad side, I want to kind of touch on that a little bit as well. Because I think there's an interesting point. So the companies that they've kind of unveiled to show these are the ad partners that we're offering, those are like Silicon Valley like companies that are meant to kind of target like software engineers kind of working at other big companies and trying to get them to use it. The issue I see is like, who are the people using these free agents with the being shown these ads to, and is there kind of alignment on like the target audience versus like who is being shown this ad? And I'm not quite sure that there is right now alignment. Like I'm sure you'll get like some smart engineers who are maybe like not really sure about AI agents. And I know there's a lot of those who haven't really gotten their hands that dirty with coding agents who might try this because it's free. But I think on the whole, like if you're like a high-end engineer working, you know, a big job, like you probably have enough money to be able to afford paying for your agent. And you definitely can't use that free agent at work because of the data sharing. So I'm curious, what do you all think on that side of the ad targeting? And I'm curious, like Adam, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I thought about this a lot. So for you that don't know, like my day job, like we are very heavily building in the marketing tech space. So what I thought about is like there's the conversion to a purchase seems like it's going to be very low in AMP because, and maybe I'm overestimating. To me, it feels like it targets students and solopreneurs, which are cost sensitive, which means they aren't going to go buy some big ticket item. And to your point, I don't know a company in the world that's got, you know, a decent amount of revenue that would let you use it, a tool like that that's going to sell their data. Like, I just don't think that's going to be viable. But there is another angle to it, which is brand awareness, because I think and that's hard to measure from a conversion standpoint from an ad, but there are a lot of companies that really focus on, hey, that student one day, that solopreneur one day, hopefully will make money. And we put our stuff in front of them enough times that they recognize our brand in the future. So I don't know what these companies are expecting. If they're expecting a high conversion ratio, that's probably going to fail. If they're looking at it as like a long-term play for brand awareness, I could see that possibly working for them, so that they're known as that person moves into a role where they can make buying decisions.
You know, I just want to circle back to a point here, and then I'll ask for Ray's thoughts here. You know, when you have a lot of employees, like software engineers working at big companies, there's a large number of them who try to do hobbyist work at home. And I think there is like a good market towards trying to target those people to use your product for their hobby project, especially now with AI. It's just easier than ever to just spin up a hobby project. And so while you can't use it at work, maybe that gets them to consider the higher end version at work, or it gets them to consider these other tools just because they're seeing these other tools. They're like, oh, what is that? I didn't think about that. And they bring it up to their or purchasing managers and stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to loop that in there. And Ray, tell me more. What are you thinking?
I agree as far as like usability and branding. I think that's probably the biggest picture here. I mean, a lot of these companies struggle for any type of attention for these types of things. And the big players tend to just really just take over and steamroll everyone. And even just in my coding community, a lot of people are just kind of fatigued, to be honest. And I'm really curious to see, for me, like first impressions and getting people to stick, because people switch between these different agents as fast as possible. But the number one complaint I hear from a lot of like solopreneurs or people who are doing their own projects is cost. And so I actually think they are going to be very popular, to be honest. And they could just be that thing where it's just like, I don't care if it's free. If you think about the intelligence where we were like 18 months ago, like the baseline model right now is actually really good, right? So for free, these people are, maybe they're coming into it first time, maybe other people. And is it going to be good enough as like getting one of these like GLMs for $3 a month and, you know, coding with that in open code or some other type of harness? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
I mean,
and
to be clear, real quick on the GLM side, and Shoots. So Shoots is another one. Shoots for sure is claiming that they can sell your data, and GLM is doing the same thing. So even though you're paying for those, you still are like basically sharing your data with these companies.
Well, and to Ray's point, like all the big labs are also kind of taking your data. Are
Yep.
they're not reselling it though, but they're using it to some extent. But there are like training checkboxes that, you know, may or may not be respected. Like, you know, like if you look at OpenAI, like they are scraping all of YouTube, and that's very obvious in the Sora release. So it's like, okay, well, if that's technically not okay, but then, you know, they have an agreement with you that they're not going to take your data, like, do you believe them? Like, maybe, you know, it's tough to say. Like, so, you know, there's a lot out there. I do think for enterprise though, there's like big agreements with like Microsoft for Azure and AWS, and they have all these zero retention policies that are very strictly enforced, and that's very serious. So I think that there's like that whole enterprise part where that data sharing needs to be as little to zero as possible. Otherwise, it's a no-go for the whole IT department. So it's curious to see like where that goes, and like maybe ads can subsidize that without the data sharing, and I don't think it necessarily is quite enough, but I guess we'll find out and we'll see how things evolve. So I think it's a good place to kind of move to the next topic of the day. So we've got Haiku that dropped this week as well. And I'm curious. I know Adam, you've benched it quite a lot. You've played with it a lot. Ray as well. You've been playing with it a bit. So I'm curious. Why don't we start with you, Adam? Tell me what do you think?
I'm going to pull up a chart here. I won't share it, but I'll kind of talk through it for informational purposes. So there's been a lot. It's kind of funny because I saw a video from Theo that said it's the best model Anthropic has ever made. And then I saw a video from AI Code King that said it's the worst model that Anthropic has ever made. So the video I called it is like, it's not the best model, it's not the worst model. It literally is an okay model. Like I would say, I was in the tests that I did, and I did major refactors, I did like new feature development, I did a bunch of back-end work. It's a solid model, and honestly, it would have been better than like Claude 3.5 back in the day, which we thought was the best model at the time. So, I mean, I was actually very pleasantly surprised with it. It's very fast. The downside is, at the time of my testing it, Klein, RuCode, completely busted in those tools. So if you see someone say, hey, it's the worst model ever, and they're using it in an agentic way, asking them what model or what agent they're using is probably a good way to follow that up, because it is completely busted in some of those. Cursor, it surprisingly worked really well for me. Like, I actually did some major, like, big plans in Cursor. I really have been liking their plan mode, by the way. Like, I think it's pretty solid. And it did better than I thought. I thought it was actually going to be pretty poor. And then Claude Code, it worked phenomenally. I didn't see really tool call failures. It iterates over itself pretty well to like self-correct things. So overall, the big thing I did is I ran my evals on it, and it generates more tokens. So it takes more tokens to finish my evals by a pretty decent margin, but it costs pretty significantly less. The cost of running my evals to Sonnet 4.5 compared to Haiku, it's about 140% more cost. And the scores were only a couple percent different from each other. So it's like, if you have a good spec and you're having it go to execute and it's like your actual coder and follow an instruction, it's pretty solid. I don't know what you guys think on that.
Is that in Claude Code for that token generation measurement?
That was all done in open code, to be specific. Yep.
I want to ask you as well, Adam. So when you're saying the plans that you're sending off to Haiku, how large of the scope are these plans? And I'm not sure, are you, because you give it a lot of tests, and I'm not sure if you like aggregate the scores or if you can like differentiate the complexity for your scoring. And I'm curious like how well Haiku does with more complicated plans versus simpler ones. Just want to know what you're thinking.
It definitely does better. I would say like under the way I categorize them is like a number of files touched. I don't know if that's the right way to categorize them, but I would say like 15 files and under, it does well. You start getting more than that, that's where the scores start dropping off for. But to be fair, a lot of the models drop off at that same time at a certain complexity. The big thing with Haiku that I found is that a lot of times what it would do is it kind of like batches things together, which I thought was kind of weird. So, and what I mean by that is like, so it would try to like take a task, and rather than building a to-do list or something or without, it would have a to-do item that's like, hey, make these 10 files. And I just felt like that was odd. Like that's kind of an odd behavior. The other odd behavior that I get is it does over-engineer things, and it does do things you don't ask for. So it does have some of the same problems that I have with Sonnet 4.5. But in general, I've put it in a place in my own mental model about it, that if it's a lighter end task that like is low complexity, you're touching maybe 5 or less files and you're doing something, not throwing a lot of tokens into context, it's a great model for that. And you can do it really inexpensively and really fast.
And one more point on this complexity metric. I'm curious, you mentioned like number of files, but are you measuring like file size as well? Like, because I know that's like a big part for agents to go in and like find the right functions to touch. Because if it can't fit, like especially Claude Code has like a 15K token limit on a file read. So like if that file is exceeding that limit, how well does the model kind of find what it needs through it?
So a test that I did, so I do that to some degree, but not as much as I would like to be totally honest with you in the evals. But a real world test that I did is I had a pretty giant file. I think it was like 2,300 lines, way too big. And I ran a refactor plan on it with Haiku. It broke it out into all the things that I would expect it to, brought that file down to less than, I think it was like 800 lines. So it did a pretty massive reduction on it, and it worked. It wasn't styled perfectly. Like, so there's like some things I needed to go restyle because they broke some stuff in the, so again, it's front end task. I would say that's kind of like a medium complexity sort of. So it did like do that fairly well. And I ran that same test in Sonnet 4.5, it built a very similar plan, and it had a pretty similar result. I would say the Sonnet 4.5 one was objectively better because the styling was better. Again, it's only a one-off test. So it did do a good job like refactoring a very large file with a high token account into a lot of smaller files.
It's good to know. And Ray, I'm curious, have you run much with Haiku? What are your thoughts on it? Like, how are you feeling about the model?
Yeah, the way that I was playing around with it, I kind of first started off like in Cursor, and I actually started off with Cheetah's model. It's kind of funny. But I actually do this thing called like context priming. So in essence, I use the Cheetah model because it's so fast, and I grab all of the different files all over the file system that need to be touched. For example, like adding a feature, and in this case it was a research task. So in this research task, I had it go use 2 MCPs. One was ref.tools, the other one was exa.ai, because I'm basically messing with Astro, and Astro has like a bunch of new stuff in V5 that are very specific. And I know these models are trained on the older versions, and they always generate like, that's kind of the pain in the butt with these models. And so I wanted to see how good is it adhering when it has this new research. And then what the joy of these 2 different MCPs that I use is that they're so minimal in terms of context for documentation research that, it maybe only uses 2,000 tokens in the whole run, but I have the most very specific up-to-date things that the model needs. And so in this type of case, with Cheetah grabbing everything and then using some of the MCP tool calls, I had Cursor generate this plan, and I'd say, how good is it at following this plan? So just like to Adam's note, I feel like when I gave it a plan that had like larger complexity, Haiku was really quick to check off certain boxes and kind of leave. And then when I just gave it a really small specific task, I felt like it just really nailed it. Like it went into even more details and stuff like that. So what I've learned from just using it in this small period of time is like, I want this to be my workhorse model, to be really, really fast. And I'm curious to experiment because you're using it in Claude Code versus Cursor. Cursor is nicely tuned for this, but one of the techniques I use in Cursor is kind of breaking out my plans now into smaller files. And so I'm trying to think about it. Maybe I can try to capture some of the characteristics of the model and what it does well, and try to see if I can make one of these agents like a Sonnet 4.5 saying, hey, given this behavior of the plan and then the diff between these two here, can you make a rule so that we can chunk out my future, plans, based off this big spec file, so that way, it's ready for Haiku, to implement or something like that. And so that's kind of the way a lot of what I'm doing. It's just kind of like having these larger models architect smaller plans for the strengths of that specific model. And that's kind of every iteration that I'm trying to do these types of things. I try to basically tweak that and start working from that.
I'm curious though, Ray, I just want to ask you on this. So you're breaking up these plans. I'm curious, have you found that like trying to build these small plans for small models, like is it because you're running them in parallel, or is it like that you find that you're getting better or faster results by doing this work to give the smaller model, like if you're spending more time prepping the plan for the smaller model, is it better to spend less time doing that and then give it to a more expensive model? I'm curious what your thinking is on this, how much you've experimented versus both.
I'm just going to like the level of detail of output and kind of verifying, is this the right actual choice? And so in essence, I'm sort of auditing the model at every step. And it's like, okay, why did you choose option B when clearly it said option A was the premier one? And that's kind of what I saw a lot. Sometimes they'll choose option B. I was like, Haiku, come on, bro. Like there's only 3 options. Option A clearly says recommended, and like you should be doing that. Yeah. And so it was interesting because like the model got a little distracted, and it's like, well, I thought it was very clear that, A is, and so, and it was not like using numbers, right? Because numbers don't do well for models. But that was a plan generated from not Sonnet, it was Sonnet 4.5 that generated the plan, for Haiku. So I'm kind of saying within the model family, but it was from Cursor side, right? And I found that a little bit surprising. It's like, that's interesting. And this plan is only like a couple hundred lines. It's not like it's 8,000 lines or anything like that.
Yeah.
In like this smaller task, it was very defined, but it had 3 different options. And I just want to say, if I give it to Haiku, like I shouldn't have to explain this, but it should follow it. And then a lot of times I have to stop it. Not a lot of times, but there were a couple times I had to stop it and I'm like, hey, wow, it didn't follow the plan. It just kind of went with this other choice. And and there's even one task where I felt like you said, it had to do extra work. So there's a task where it created a new component to render actual markdown, but this already does markdown already in the code in the specific file that it was already in. And so, and that was option B, right? And I was like, well, option A was just like move this line of code up here, and then all of a sudden it's going to be rendered in Markdown. We don't need another section. We just create another, hashtag. Like in the Markdown, it's going to make another header file, and like it's going to be rendered correctly. And so, like I knew that as an engineer, and that's kind of why I wanted to break it down, because if I had too big of a plan, then I wouldn't be able to see the output. And so by focusing it down, it was really interesting. I was like, I wonder what else is doing like this. So that was kind of like some of that more specific behavior. Yeah.
I think your approach of finding the right places to audit the output of the model to supervise what's being done next, that's like a really great approach. And I think more people should really embrace that, to just not just like have this monolithic plan that they're not going to read to give to a model to implement. Like you got to find some place to check what's being done here, because otherwise it's just going to go off the rails and you'll never know what's going to be output, especially when there's all these choices being shown to the model to like, if you're giving the model too much opportunity to kind of break away and branch off in different directions, like that's not going to be a good, especially with smaller models. I'm curious, Adam, you had some thoughts that you wanted to chime in there with Ray's thoughts there. So I'm curious what you think here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Ray, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's an experiment that I did probably 8 months or so ago, where I had this idea that if you have a good plan in an orchestrator, you can actually dish out the necessary context to a smaller model and then have it go and execute. So I did this thing in GosuCoder, which I called my micromanager. The micromanager would go through, build a plan, and it would divide things into individual tasks, send it out to what I would call my junior. I had an intern actually, so intern, junior, mid-level, senior, architect, designer, and it would dish it out. The challenge that I had is, to your point, Eric, there's a diminishing return here, because it was a great experiment because I learned a lot doing it. And I was able at times to actually get a more cost-effective, reasonable quality output. But a lot of times the passing of context between, the model that kind of built the plan and then the smaller model to go do it is very hard to get right. And because they lose the bigger picture of like what the overall system is and they're just doing the task. So it would make bad decisions, or it would do work that had already been done before. So there were actually some times that it actually ended up being equal or more expensive depending on the type of task that was sent through it. I do believe there is a strategy somewhere, like somehow, where we can actually, to me right now, I'm doing it in my head. I'm like, oh, this is a low complexity task. I'm going to just use Haiku or GLM 4.6. But it would be really neat if we could get to a place where that's kind of managed for us in some way, and we can define like, hey, small things do this model, medium things do this model, but it's so nebulous. Anyway, to your point, I would agree with you that sometimes it's better just to pay for the big model and have it kind of done up front, which I think is the point you were making, Eric.
Well, I mean, it's a question, right? Like, it depends on what you're thinking about, like what you're trying to optimize for, right? Like, I mean, personally, like I'm subscribed to like the Claude Max for 100 plan and the OpenAI $200 plan. So I've got those two there, and I'm like, well, these are like up there with the top models. Like, why would I bother with the cheaper ones? If I guess the only reason is speed. But like, if I'm just trying to optimize costs, like that's not really a concern for me. So I'm curious, like if you're trying to play with these smaller models, is it like mostly around cost, or is it speed? And like, what are the metrics you're kind of optimizing for?
I would say it's probably a few things. So first off, I'm a big believer that you should have different models because they respond very differently to the same problem. So a lot of times when I'm like doing my own planning, I will talk to 3 different models and I'll kind of iterate on it, and I build my own plan on kind of how I want to execute something. I really love like using GPT-5. I love using Claude 4.5 Sonnet. I used to use Gemini 2.5 Pro a lot for this too, because it would be very good at, holding a lot of context. I don't use that as much anymore, but I love the different solutions that each of them come up with. I love comparing them. So when I'm using like GLM 4.6, for example, I love its design capability. I love how it will actually build these micro interactions that other models won't do, and it'll give me ideas for things that I can do. I'm not a good designer. We don't have a full-time designer on our team, so I'm kind of relying on AI to kind of fill that gap. This would be different if you had a big company. So to me, it's like, what is the personality of the model, and how can you use that in the way that makes the most sense? So for Haiku, for example, Haiku might be something that is just, because it's so much faster, I can prototype a lot quicker, I can iterate a lot quicker, and then I might just get to a point where I'm like, yes, this is what I want to do, build the plan around it, and actually go execute it with like a GPT-5 or something. So to me, it's like speed matters some, price matters some, the design capability matters some. Some models are really good at like back end. Like I do a lot of machine learning too. Like there are some models that are really good at doing machine learning, data analysis, helping me kind of do that. There are other models that are not so good at that. So anyway, to me, it's the personality of the model.
Yeah. And I'm curious for you, Ray, what's the biggest reason to pick different models for you? Like when you say you use Sonnet for planning a lot and you really like how it performs the plan mode. And actually, I do want to touch a little bit on that after, Adam, because you were talking a little bit about Cursor's plan mode. And you had mentioned that you really like Sonnet in there, even over some of the OpenAI models. But I'm curious, Ray, let's hear it. Like what's the biggest factor there for you?
For the smaller models, for me, it's just like doing the sweet lifecycle work that I don't really like to do. So, like writing up bug reports, and then other things like documentation, and just kind of just digging through the repo as fast as possible, which is why I'm super excited about Cheetah, because of how fast it is to grab information. And like, if I have 2 models like that, like a Cheetah model and Haiku, like I know that Haiku is going to be smarter than Cheetah for like actually trying to verify
I'm curious,
information.
like I'm actually not sure which one is like a bigger model or which one's smarter. Like it's not obvious to me necessarily.
Well, whenever I've given Cheetah to like write code, it just gets really sloppy, super duper fast. It just kind of falls off a cliff. And then where Haiku can kind of at least stay focused. And so instead of writing rules, I'll just kind of delegate it to a smarter model. And so one of my flows I have in Sui is I have this thing called like a bug documentator. And so like it's using that same thing I use for documentation for the Kanban, incoming, currently actively working on, and stuff that's been completed. And so I'm building something that's going to scrape like Discord, scrape X. Whenever I launch an app or something and I want that feedback, sometimes it's just hard for me to keep up. So I'm just going to have one of these quick models go through, scrape as much data as possible, follow some rules to dump it into like these little areas. And then, I can actually have like a fast model like Cheetah just scrubbing through the code and just, okay, what are the functions that are affected by this? This is the stuff that the user has given us. here's my debug inputs. Okay, now I need to do these tool calls to these like, convex. I need to go check for errors. And then like, I want to hand those off to these smaller models that are really fast, lightweight, and just do these smaller prescribed, skill sets. And then each of those skill sets will just kind of come back into like some type of orchestrator that Adam's talking about. I love debugging. Like that was kind of probably my most valued. Actually, it's extremely valuable skill. It's like $1 million skill. And that's actually a lot of problems I solved was through debugging, like really complex systems. So I'm basically trying to rebuild them with language models.
That's really cool. I just so when you mentioned like having the smaller models go and retrieve things and pull out data, like I guess like the bottleneck there is what they return to you, because they're not giving you the data itself, they're giving you maybe like a summary of what they found. And I find like when I was using Sonnet 4 in the past, before 4.5 came out, that was one of the things that I really struggled with, was that like I just couldn't trust what Sonnet 4 was telling me. Like if I'd have it audit something or summarize something or read the Git history or pull something out, I just found that it was making stuff up and being sloppy. So that's like a key thing. And when you're turning to small models to do it quickly, sometimes you spend more time on verification that the data they returned is actually correct, or they tell you something you assume is right, and then they lead you astray and you get in the wrong direction. So I think that's like always the bottleneck with like multi-agent kind of workflows, is that you're kind of trying to take what they're doing, but like you can't necessarily trust it if you're trying to optimize too far on the cost curve. Even with high-end models, they will make mistakes too. But maybe it's like much slower, and then maybe like the small models gets you to that same mistake that they would otherwise get, but like faster, and then you can iterate more quickly. And that's like a really valuable thing. I think these things will change over time, but definitely something to go through. So I wanted to go a little bit into planning a little bit more. So this is something that you both have been playing with. So can you tell me, Adam, you've been using the cursor plan mode. I'm sure you've used other plan modes. I'm curious, like you're a big RuCode fan. They have a plan mode. They have like all kinds of things going on there. What is it that makes Cursor's plan mode so special to you?
I think it's really two things. The first thing is it's the first plan mode that very specifically asks you like good follow-up questions before it actually kicks off. And I know this may seem like such a minor thing, but most of them will be like, hey, I want to go and refactor this file. And it'll just go blah and make up a bunch of stuff. Like, well, that's stupid. Like, because you're remaking stuff I already have. Like, but what Cursor seems to do is they actually do a little bit more gathering of context. They actually build a really good... I've never got questions. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I've never got questions that made no sense. Like, they all like are like, yes, that's a really good thing. Like, I could see I need to think about this now. And then the output of it is phenomenal, because it's not like just isolated in the little sidebar and you're trying to read through it. It actually puts it in like a markdown format that you can actually read. And one of the measures that I like to use for a plan mode is, can I give what is exactly in that plan to another agent and have it execute it? And I just feel like it's one of the best that I've seen, especially with Sonnet 4.5 specifically.
And when you're looking at that plan, like, can you tell me a little bit about like what you're seeing in it? Like, is it just the description of what you're trying to build, like the feature, the spec of it, or is it more in terms of like the specific architecture and parts of the code you want to touch? It's a combination of both. Like, what are you observing in that?
Yeah, it's both those things. So like, if you think about it from, I mean, when you were working at Unity, I'm sure you guys did a lot of this too. Like, you're rolling out a new feature, you're doing something. A lot of times what would happen is depending on who you have working on it, you've got to get a pretty detailed, hey, we're going to go and we're going to add these 10 new files. We're going to update the data model to be this particular thing. We're going to need these 5 new APIs. Here's the functionality in them. And it does just a really good job of like laying all of that out. So I literally could take what it gives me and give it to an engineer, and they would know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish, the files that are expected to be created, the new APIs that are expected to be created, and the to-do list at the bottom genuinely seems to be like a really good indication of accomplishing that spec that it adds at the top.
Yeah. And I'm curious, Ray, what are your thoughts on it? Like, how's it been helpful to you?
So I've used Droid quite a bit, and for the spec mode, and that was kind of like the first one that really impressed me, because I was using Claude Code's plan mode initially, like when they first came out. I was like, oh, this is great. Finally a really nice light way of doing the plans, because I would otherwise generate them myself with O3 or Opus, and back in the day. And so I've seen kind of the evolution, and I liked Droid's models for planning, but then now the questions that I get back from Cursor and this like little interactivity game that they kind of play to make sure that you have the right spec kind of dialed in, to me has actually made the bigger difference in actually the quality of output that I wanted. Because a lot of times I wasn't really sure, but somehow I was able to pull that out of me. And the questions, for example, for me, like I did a live stream where I added like a new feature to the front end, and it got like extremely specific on like, do you want to like solve this now, or do you want to kind of chunk it out in phases? You know, like do you want to do like a one shot like refactor to the AI SDK v5 with your whole thing, or do you want to have like a secondary place and plan so that you can kind of leapfrog? And I was like, bro, this is the only thing we do here is YOLO, bro. Like, come on. Like, and so I was just curious to push these models in these different directions. And then, okay, like now that I'm doing this really risky task, is it going to follow through on the other end, or is it going to prefer, you know, going through some other rabbit hole to kind of follow through it? So that was kind of like really interesting because, you know, Cursor kind of kept its plan on track, which I thought was really interesting, where sometimes in Droid in the spec mode, it'll, especially with codecs, it'll just kind of start flying off the rails a little bit. And it didn't matter if I went high or low or medium or whatever. It just kind of, there was a difference between the different models. So I did find that in this specific planning mode with Cursor, with Sonnet 4.5 in the little brain icon, which does the thinking, it yielded really, really good results. Also, obviously having the max toggle on, so that gets the most context. And I also saw that it has a 1 million token context window for that too. So token efficiency was another thing that I actually was blown away by with Cursor's plan mode and Cursor's implementation of the model too, because typically, you know, in Claude Code, I would spend like 3 to 4 times more tokens or way more to ship features. I'm shipping them now like in 50 to 75K tokens, really big features in like 125K tokens. That includes research, that includes a plan mode, that includes the code output too. And these are like touching, you know, like probably like a dozen different files and reading them and doing this type of thing. So they're extremely efficient on caching. And the latest version of Cursor as of, you know, October 17th, 2025, that's basically has been kind of blowing me away. And I'm actually picking, you know, when you think about like all of the different AI agents I go to, like the Cursor one now is the one I'm picking up. Maybe it's just like that meme with that girlfriend where you're just kind of like, hey Cursor, like, you know, like George's my girlfriend, and then I kind of go this way now. Like,
I think a big part of this, to your point on the plan mode, asking you the right questions, I think a big part of it is the UX of like finding the right points to ask you the right questions to get to on the right path. Because, you know, if you're just trying to YOLO some big plan, and the model's asking you these questions in other places, but you're not really reading them, or they're not stopping on those questions, I think that's going to be a big difference in the result. And I am finding, you know, like this point of like, do you want to do A, B, or C? I think that's really just the model. Like Sonnet 4.5 is a model that in the training, the way it's built, it really pushes you to make these choices. Like I see it coming up a lot. I use it in Claude Code. I use it, you know, in RepoPrompt in different places. It's always coming up with these questions, which direction you want to go. So I am curious to, it's always difficult to untie like which part of it is the model versus the tool causing this behavior. And there's the prompts in there that are affecting some of it too. And they might like accentuate some of these behaviors too. But yeah, just to go back, like, you know, it's great that Cursor is doing this. The UX is right. Now I wanted to dive in a little bit on this point as well on the retrieval side. So we had this week as well, another bit of news that came out was, you know, Cognition released this new fast Grep model, the SWE Grep model. And they're kind of touting that they're beating out embedding retrieval. So I just want to, for those who are not familiar, just get a little primer on what this whole thing is, because, you know, it's very complicated if you're kind of figuring this out. So when a coding agent tries to find out context, there's a few ways they can go about it. And one of them is to just use some old school tools. One of them is called Grep, and there's another one called Glob. And these are like bash tools that you can go ahead and run. And they will basically scan your repo with some strings. You can do some regex. You can pull out information to try and like surface information from all the files. You know, Glob is for paths, to do some similar path checking. But then other tools like Cursor, they were one of the first to really push this, where there's this embedding retrieval system. So what that is that you create an index of your code base with some vector store, and then you have an embedding model that does semantic retrieval. So you'll have some keywords like I want to find auth system or login or whatever, and it will try and surface from that the relevant parts of the code that are associated with that feature. So what the SWE grep model is trying to pioneer and saying, like, none of that embedding stuff is valuable, like it doesn't matter, like the models will just from navigating your code base using this grep tool, the simple like plain text search, is going to outperform that, and you just let the model run. If you do it fast enough, it's going to be better. So I'm curious, Cursor is doing a kind of a hybrid of the approaches. Other tools like Claude Code are doing purely just the grep side. People have different experiences. I do know that, like, if you get a really good embedding system, you can probably be more efficient, but then you're delegating some choices to a small, like an embedding model that is kind of robbing the main model of some choices and visibility. So you have to really trust that it's doing the right job. So there's a lot of trade-offs involved here. I'm curious, Adam, you've worked with machine learning a lot. I'm curious, like, you're playing with these models. Like, what are your sense on this, like, agentic retrieval versus embedding versus hybrids? Like, I know Rue, you're a big fan of, is using both of them. So yeah, curious what your thinking there is.
I need to do more like research into the thing that Cognition put out. I will say the video that they put out was actually pretty phenomenal, where they had a side-by-side before and after. But traditionally, I know there's like, I don't know why this is a contentious thing, but there is some part of the community that doesn't think like having a vector database of your code base that you can search is a good idea. I disagree with that, and I really do think that if you could have a really good semantic search engine, you can just lower the amount of context that you're driving in your overall system, which brings your cost down, and ideally it's going to bring the speed of that up. Time will tell, though. Like, I could be totally wrong by this, because in the tests that I've done, like with Augment Code, for example, one of the best context engines, when you see it go like, hey, go find this particular thing, and then it returns back exactly what it needs to return, like, that is phenomenal. No additional context. They didn't have to go read a bunch of files. And if you look at the algorithm behind a lot of these, what they're basing it on a lot of times is the file name. Is there a file name that's kind of, and then from there it has to read through the code to try to understand it. So there's a lot of searching that has to happen to get that retrieval mechanism working. So I don't know, where I fall on the fence right now is I'm very interested in what Cognition put out, because their side-by-side video was very, very cool. But I'm also still a big believer that I think a vector database that you can actually do semantic searching in, when done right, I think is probably going to be superior from a cost and speed perspective. Time will tell, though.
Yeah, I think, I've talked a lot to different folks. I've spent some time talking to the folks at Augment Code, and I do think you're right, like that their solution is still very important. I think that the challenge that emerges with this embedding solution, though, is like how general purpose it is. Like, a lot of these companies are struggling to benchmark their embedding model and such on like the totality of code bases. Like, if you're on like a medium-sized code base and it kind of resembles a little bit of how the Augment Code side of the code base is structured, because like they test on their own code, I think you're going to probably get pretty good results. I think if you're deviating too far from how that model was built, you might struggle a little bit more. You get to some languages that are not super familiar to the model that's being surfaced. So you there is some intelligence, some little magic that's going on there that you have to kind of trust to make sure that it returns the right thing. And I think ultimately, like to your point, you probably want some combination of these tools, maybe a sub agent that will do the grepping, do the semantic search, try and combine the two. What was better? If you have this happen fast enough and the cost is low enough, you could probably combine these approaches and try and get the best of both worlds. And we'll see. But the alternative is like maybe we end up just training our own embedding models on all of our code bases. Like for enterprise scale, like maybe that makes sense. If they got a big code base or paying engineers millions of dollars a year, maybe they can invest a little bit in a purpose-built retrieval model for their code base. Maybe it makes sense. We'll see where that goes.
Yeah, you look at Google, for example, they've got like that big mono repo. Like I could see like that making a perfect sense for that. Sorry, go ahead. But yeah.
I was actually going to ask questions. We have all these fancy techniques, but sometimes, I'm always a huge fan of, like, I remember this one technique that was pioneered like almost like a decade plus ago, an early ML stage of like, if we take all the CPU cycles and every single piece of hardware input and like look at the 80/20, like what's the distribution here? And then can we do certain things? Like that innovation got into like a operating system at the really low level for like just that. And it added like 2 to 3 hours of battery life to like 5-year-old computers, right? And so there are lots of questions that people ask, and there's a lot of tool calling that happens all the time. If you aggregate all that data across all these different customers, or a specific code base, right? Like specifically to these different companies, I'm pretty sure you see a lot of these types of retrieval tasks happening repeatedly over and over. And I'm not sure if they're actually doing like old school ML, like locally, and building an index over like 7 days to say like, okay, we have enough data now to make your retrievals a lot faster across all of your different repos in your machine or something like that because of your communication style or generality. But have you guys seen anything like that? I have not heard anyone talk about it. This is kind of also a dark art, it's kind of back in their models.
I mean, I feel like I totally what you're saying. Like the way I think about it is like when you're working on an engineering team, there's always some people on your team that know something really well about a feature or something. And I go ask them like, hey, where is this happening or why is this happening? And they can tell you. Like I've worked with people that can be like, yeah, it's, 3/4 of the way down, there's a function called something like this, and go do it. So my dream has always been if we could get like the tool call to get the context that we need to be that fast. So can we have like a natural language question like, hey, I need to understand the flow of data from here to here, and then we could actually return that back without having to go and read a million different files and try to understand everything. That lowers the cost down significantly. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I do feel like that's the way it's going to go. And I think augment code is honestly the closest to that on the market right now. And to your point, Eric, I do think it's a combination. Because even when augment does that, you will still see it come back and like read the areas that the context engine tells it. So I think it is a combination approach.
Yeah. Well, if you're using Sonnet especially, Sonnet is a model that doesn't take anything it returns as fact, and it will want to read its own information to get its own source of truth. That's just like a quirk of the model. Like it just doesn't trust anything except its own searching. Codex is a little different. Like it'll take some more things at face value. So that's like an interesting divergence there.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. I'm sure different models will come, but like I imagine as well, like the more models are trained on Sonnet's output, the more you'll get that kind of behavior kind of baked in. And it's a little bit unfortunate in some cases. Like we do need models to kind of trust you a little bit more, especially if you know what you're doing. But like on all this fancy stuff, like sometimes it makes me think, like I was seeing, Dax, the creator of Open Code, he's like, yeah, like they're doing this crazy thing, but like we just took an off the shelf model, ran it through our basic tools, and it was faster. And I'm like, maybe we're overthinking some of this. And I'm just curious, like, like the old way of doing search was just, let's just embed some keywords in our files or whatever. And like, maybe you'll just search the keywords and then it'll pop up and you'll just find it. Maybe we just need to go back to keyword search and it'll be faster and simpler. And, just spend a little time. The models are good at adding keywords, just maintain an index of keywords. Maybe that's all you need. So there's a lot to think about. There's maybe sometimes, we're over engineering these solutions, for fancy valuations. But, I think some of it is merited, but, we'll see, where it nets out.
I think I think both things are true. I actually really like that you brought up Dax's post because I thought that was also hilarious too.
Yeah.
And the chart that he showed, if I remember right, was pretty astronomically faster, which I was like, okay. Again, I can't verify any of that, but I did think that was kind of funny. And I do think people overcomplicate things. And one of the places people overcomplicate things a lot, I think, is trying to call all of these MCPs and try to, like, I've actually landed in a place that you should be using very few of those. Like, I just don't think you need to use them that often. And there are a lot of people that will have like dozens of them that they're trying to get executing at the right place and whatnot. And I think code-based searching is honestly one of those as well. The only reason that I push on that a little bit is the context, the information in the main context window is so important. Like if it gets crowded with a bunch of data that it's reading in, it blows your cost up. But I mean, cost maybe doesn't matter to you, but at a certain point, the context gets, I think the right word is like polluted, and because there's like data in there that doesn't need. So to me, it's like that part of it that I care about, which is why I think it's a valid thing. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, just on that note, that's why, I was just working this week. I released a feature in Repo Prompt that is specifically focused on that part of retrieving the information, trying to organize which files are there and which subsets of your files. Like if you have a large file, like which parts of the file are actually important, trying to build like the perfect context with the right clarified prompt to give a model. And I think like for me, like in my own workflows, I still find to get like the best kind of architecture and execution, you still want to give like a model. Like I really love GPT-5 Pro a lot. It thinks the longest on it. If you can give it just the right context to think for a while on, you're going to get really like incredible results. And especially if it's seeing the full picture all at once without having to go and fetch more information, it's like really powerful. I just wanted to make a quick note of that. There's like a lot of things coming around, a lot of there.
Can I ask you something on that, Eric? Because I think I don't want to speak for you, Ray, but I have not used GPT-5 Pro that
Mhm.
much at all, other than just like one-off thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like a nebulous question. I'm just
For
trying
sure.
to like this may not matter at all. Like from GPT-5 High,
Mhm.
do you think it's significantly better than GPT-5 High? Like, is it like an order of magnitude better? Is it a little bit better? Is it?
Yeah. I think the right way to frame this is so I was thinking a lot about this, like what makes it better. And as I was working on Repo Bench, the benchmark I put out a couple weeks ago, and I was looking at the scores, and I had GPT-5 High and I had GPT-5 Pro that was over it. I think the thing that really came up for me looking at it is that, so in that bench, the thing is you run it on your machine, you run the model, it's got a fixed set of tests, and the models will run through the same tests with the same prompts, and they will get different scores. And when you have a reasoning model, the thing that you're going to observe is that each run might differ in some significant ways. And what I found with GPT-5 High is that you can run it 10 times, you'll get 10 different results, but like one of those 10 will probably be like much better than the other 9. And what GPT-5 Pro does is that it kind of smooths out that variance and kind of pulls up the scoring of the intelligence of the model, so you're going to get like a more consistently really good answer versus like GPT-5 High will sometimes give you a really good answer, sometimes give you a pretty good answer. Usually it's quite good, but like sometimes it'll be much better than other times. And that 5 Pro really like gives you consistency on that really good answer. And that's kind
really
of what
cool.
I'm thinking. Yeah.
So this is the caviar model. This is like I just want the caviar. We're having champagne. Yeah, like that's how like there will be signs when I'm rich. It's like type of model. Well, I'm curious because Grok 4 Heavy with Grok Code, right? Like I think it's supposed to utilize a similar technique, and it's coming sometimes this October apparently, or this fall. I don't know.
Yeah. So Grok 4. It's hard to say because Grok 4 is a lot of things. There's Grok 4 Fast, there's Grok 4 like July model, there's Grok Code, and they're kind of mixing these in. They're making a nebulous of what you're actually running. The Heavy, I know it's also only 4 models, and they kind of just take like an aggregate of the 4 runs and pull it up. Whereas like GPT-5 Pro, I'm pretty sure it's not just all parallel. Like they are running them, I think, to some extent sequentially, which is why it's so much longer. So it's not all parallel, and they're kind of doing something around there that is not clear. They haven't disclosed to kind of pull it up. And I think there is some special sauce there that is a little bit better than what the Heavy models are doing, which is a little simpler in the algo. So it's worth evaluating that. I think there's a lot to explore on these techniques for reasoning models specifically, to try and run them multiple times, kind of pull out the best parts of each and combine them, because you do get consistently better results because of how spiky these models are. Yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah. Back when like Opus came out, Opus 4, I did a bunch of like API testing on that. It's just so expensive. It's very hard to like, and GPT-5 Pro is even more expensive than that. So it's scary to me to go down the route of like fully testing that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I use 5 Pro quite a bit through the ChatGPT API, where I'm already paying, so not on the API, so with ChatGPT itself, I'm already paying the $200 a month, and they don't cap you on usage for 5 Pro, so you can just spam it and try things, and that's what's really nice about it. The caveat is that you have 60K tokens max, and that kind of is one of the motivating factors for shipping my Discover feature in Repo Prompt, because you can compact, like you find all the context and you give it a budget, say I want to fit as much context as I can in 60K tokens, and the model will try and do that work to really find the right context for that amount of tokens, so that you can just not think about it or let it run and then paste it straight to GPT-5 Pro to get its opinion, so you don't have to think about any of that context management.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to play there. These big pro models, there's some untapped potential there. I always said, like when I was playing a lot with O1 Pro back in the day, there was times when I was using it where I was like, wow, like there's like, this is like a hint of super intelligence to me. Like there's some things that I saw O1 Pro do back in the day where it was getting stuff that like I was like, you'd need like someone really dedicated to thinking about this problem like a long time to get to a solution that this kind of thing could provide. It's not always like O1 Pro was like a spiky, like it was not like it's been surpassed by now. But like these pro models, there's something special sauce about them, and it's interesting to see how they kind of get those flashes of brilliance more consistently. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. We had so this is our episode 2 right now. we had some thoughts on episode 1. I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate all the people who've responded so positively to episode 1, and who've showed up and subscribed to the channel. It's been really surreal to see how much growth it's taken on so quickly. I'm curious, Adam, Ray, like what do you want to say to the audience right now?
Yeah, Ray, you want to take it first?
Sure. I'm blown away, and I'm really glad that we're sort of creating this space. I feel like it's very much needed for us to sit down and kind of absorb everything. A lot of stuff is happening. I mean, just the free agents thing alone was like, oh my God, are we losing our minds? Are we not? And I think this is kind of a nice place for all of us to engage. And we love that we have the YouTube thing as well. So people are dropping lots of comments and lots of engagements going on there. So I definitely appreciate that. And everyone's coming at it from these different places, and I think we need more of these types of discussions. So I encourage everyone to kind of join in on this, and I've been super thankful for everyone's participation. And I love seeing everyone's like, I've heard of 2 of you, but I've not heard of 1, or like I've heard, like it's just so cool that all of our perspectives can combine together. But we have like very different backgrounds,
Of course.
and approaching these from different places, and it's kind of really for me. This is my favorite time of the week to come together every 2 weeks, and we come together and just kind of catch up a little bit, basically.
Yeah.
Same. I mean, honestly, you said it perfectly, Ray. Like, for me, selfishly, I like learning from you guys because you guys are also testing things that I'm unable to. And I feel this way about the entire community. Like, I'm only like a little bubble perspective, right? And I can only work on so much different things at one time. I love it when I get to hang out with you guys and like hear, like, the conversation we just had about GPT-5 Pro is amazing. I haven't had much time to test that, so I appreciate it. I think the first episode blew away my expectations, and I'm hoping we don't let you guys down, and that we're able to kind of continually improve the quality, and that you find it useful. And if you don't, or if you do, like, leave us comments in the below, like, that way we know how to continue forward with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel the same. It's been great learning from both of you guys. Like I'm in my own bubble too, working on my app, and I try to use the different agents, but I don't spend enough time trying out all of the open source models, and I don't spend that much time in Cursor at all. So it's good to see that both of you trying it out and showing what they're doing. That's really pushing the field forward. Like, they are the biggest company in the space right now. It's good to get some perspective. Ray, especially you're trying all the tools. You're trying Droid, you're trying everything. You're just following whatever's hot this week. You want to give it a shot. You want to give people the right take on how it works for you, and you're solving real problems with them and seeing how it performs. So I think that's really important, and I think you're doing a great job of like standing in for these engineers all across the world, like trying these tools and having the experience of trying to learn with them. And so I really appreciate that. And Adam, of course, you're taking a really good job of benching these models, of trying these different agents. You're like all over the map, like running these different agents, trying to do these different tasks. Like, I think that's super important, and not enough people are giving that too much thought, because models are just running. You can't really trust the labs with what scores they're telling you, because they will show the scores that make their model look the best. And it's a bit of a marketing game there. So anyway, I think that's a good place to wrap for today. And really grateful for y'all taking the time to check us out. And hopefully you'll join us for episode 3. Thank you very much.
All right. Peace out, everybody.
See you guys.